You can have things that are good, fast, or cheap. And that is actually being challenged with agents and MCP because people can actually get better results quicker and at lower cost than adding more people, adding more tools. Hi, I'm Dan Faulkner. I'm the CEO of SmartBear.
Hi, I'm Vineeta Puranik. I'm CPO of SmartBear.
And today we're talking about agentic automation and MCP.
So agents and MCP servers work together to create this wonderful agentic automation layer. They can exist on their own, but together they make more things available. So MCP tools will now allow you to stitch together tools from different vendors through the agent. So agent could go directly to an API and do a lot of work in a different way, but here it's available in one place for it to stretch together.
One of the things I read early about this was that MCP, and I think the reason it's taken off so much, is this idea that it made agents usable, deployable at scale in a way that was probably less easy prior to MCP emerging.
I agree with that it allowed us to think so much differently by exposing these tools from our products. We saw the same thing with all our SmartBear products, that as you expose these tools, our own teams realized the different ways to write agents where they could be stitched in a much different way than writing a piece of software that was doing all the memory and orchestration on its own. And so they help each other.
So speaking of our folks, what are the implications? Why was this evolution exciting for people who are building software, building applications, testing applications? Why was it particularly relevant to them?
Over last many years, the complexity of how software is created has increased. Microservices, distributed databases, distributed deployments, ephemeral environments that come, go. So it was high complexity in the first place and abstraction. In come the API, AI tools, and now that abstraction has increased along with the scale at which the code is produced. So when a change happens, what changed? How do you test in order to make sure quality is still good? Those questions became many folds more difficult. Because of that memory we talked about that MCP and agents will have, now they're doing much more than one instruction at a time, how we used to program before. Instead, now they're going to stitch things together. They can know what version you're working with, what piece of code changed, maybe what changed in the UI that may be impacted. And so this analysis and intelligence is where our teams are enjoying this new MCP agents help, where humans can be in the loop, or you can go much higher in autonomy. They're able to produce, they understand your history, they can produce PRs that you can even deploy. Now it's in your control how much to stay in. So my analogy would be like GPS. You know how it showed us a route. You can go from A to B, you can take a right, then a left, and take this highway. And now what we enjoy is it's not just that. It can also tell you there is a traffic somewhere, change your route. Or some cars will tell you, be aware of the risks around you, whoever is speeding, if the car in front of you is going to brake suddenly. So much more intelligence and memory of your driving. It changed the world.
We've been talking about levels of autonomy. You mentioned it, and you've also mentioned human in the loop. And I like the GPS analogy because I find every now and then I'll be using my GPS, relying on my GPS, and it'll tell me to turn right, but there's a diversion there, or the police have blocked off that road for some reason because there's work being done on the road. And so as the human, you have to take over control again. So this kind of human in the loop concept is somewhat similar.
Yes.
The agent can say, here's what I think you should do, and the human can give permission or override it as they need to.
Yes, and I think this trust that we are creating with these agentic systems is necessary, because that is the only way you can go to the highest level of autonomy, where you're now trusting it to have that memory, make those decisions, and let it deploy.
Right.
But that trust that you have with your car that you eventually create is exactly the same way our agents will work.
So let's pick an example from an area that's close to our hearts, APIs and looking after the API lifecycle. So in the old world, you might have somebody who's responsible for the API spec, and they could modify that. And that might have some downstream consequences that all sorts of other people in the team who are looking after that API may or may not come across, may or may not discover. And that could take a long time. It's very error prone. So how does MCP help us here?
That's actually a great example. So it could break other areas of code that was calling it. It could possibly break tests. It could be somewhere in the mobile or UI lifecycle that it was being used. And as you said, in the old world, developer who authored it may run the unit test that they had written, then it gets handed off to somebody else, then it gets tested, and maybe not the correct test it runs. Let's look at what we can do with agents now. There could be an agent that automatically detects that someone changed the code. Now you could have steps. Number one, it can first of all check, did you change any compliance or error catching that I must fix? Are you still to the correct spec? Then it can look at, hey, there was externally facing documentation. I'm going to update it that it's correct. It can look at what tests I need to run in case of APIs. Do I update them? Do I rerun them? But here is where it gets even more wonderful with APIs now connect to UI. So it can find the tests by looking at the code change, the regression test suite, and run those test suites, self-heal them as required. And so now what could have been many, many handoffs between different teams and most likely breaking something, because look at our contract testing, for example. In this case, automatically, agents can say who else has contracts dependent on this change, run those microservices tests, and make sure nothing breaks. You know what cost it has when this error makes it to production. And so the power of the stitching this orchestration is where the agents will play a big part.
It's pretty huge because, yes, there's the business benefit of not having that error be discovered so late in the process. But it's also it's a much better developer experience. The agents and that workflow are taking better care of the consumers of the API. They're making sure that it's actually ready for them and it does what it says it does.
Yes, and in our world, you're right. We are helping our automation developers and developers better their experience. So if you're using our tools, what this is going to do is you can focus on your design, you can focus on architecture, and this is like your co-pilot that's going to make sure that everything else stays in sync, in quality, run the right things so that things are not accidentally broken.
Yeah, and in principle, that it should kind of speed you up and make you more confident.
100%. And right now, when people slow down to release something, it's most often than not for making sure that the changes are working in all scenarios. And that you haven't unknowingly broken something. With all these distributed environments, very few times there is that confidence in the quality and the deployment of your code.
And when we think about APIs, you can see all of those strands that need to come together: the code, the spec, the documentation, the tests. It's so easy for those to get out of sync with each other in ways that are difficult to track. So if we can just tie that together automatically, it's a pretty big help.
It's avoiding the drift that can happen between what you changed versus what got used versus what got deployed. Absolutely.
So I'm going to pick another example from kind of the SmartBear ecosystem. And we care a lot about the built application. We do a lot of our testing at the application versus the code. And there's this whole sequence of steps that you need to carry out to test your application. So one of those is you've got to create the tests and make sure that they stay current. And then you want to kind of run those tests as efficiently as possible once you've done it in all these different environments that you care about. So how's MCP helping us there?
So that part still stays where you need to run these tests. But where these workflows come in handy, imagine an environment where we change the requirement. Product manager wants a feature updated.
Yeah.
Now, in a normal setting, you will have a developer looking at that feature and update the code. Your automation developer is probably going into our Qmetry kind of application and see what tests do I have here? Do I need the new ones? They're going to create automation that probably has every step of the way defined. Now, let's see what we can do with Qmetry and Reflect. You can have a workflow defined where when a requirement changes, we can keep track of how the feature changed, create a test case based on that requirement that we can add to our test management.
We can do that automatically.
We can do that automatically and create them. It can also look at the tests that were impacted, auto-heal them. Reflect is wonderful at self-healing, and Reflect is our automation tool, and it's connected to Qmetry from MCP and user interface side. And so now what can happen is you added a test case based on the change, and you automated it without any person getting involved. You can now test that use case as soon as the developer is done adding that PR. No handoffs, no time wasted, and you're keeping up with the speed. Now the automation developer absolutely still can be in the loop to make sure at the end, Qmetry can show you your coverage and gaps. And so they can still keep this going and get involved to point it in the correct direction, but it could also completely keep up with the changes that are happening.
I mean, that's pretty wild because there's a huge gap in functional coverage. Nobody tests all of the things that they'd like to test. It's just cost prohibitive. There's not enough testers. There's not enough time. So this is essentially making a pretty significant dent in that gap, helping you keep up with your changes as they're made, and actually just getting more functional coverage anyway.
You can, and what this will do, same problem happens in case of if we go back to API. What our tools can now do is how many times people write code exactly how you want it with the spec. Well, there is a lot of code out there that's not to open API specification or with documentation. Now you can write an agent that can go in your code, look at all those APIs, create the PRs to fix it to spec and to governance, and give you the PRs to quickly just review and submit. If you go to any developer and say you have to do it manually and then someone has to test it so that you didn't break anything, now it will be possible for us to also keep up with technical debt along with keeping up with new feature changes and requirements. As the teams adopt all these agents and MCP servers, it's not just the technical teams that are impacted. It is impacting the businesses and business leaders and outcomes. So has it reached that leaders level yet, the understanding of it?
It's reached some of them. And as with any innovation, we see a pretty traditional shape in the adoption of new innovations. So kind of the trope goes, innovation happens quickly, adoption happens slowly. And I think adoption of agentic workflows and MCP is going to go as fast as anything we've seen, but it's still going to take time because people have different business contexts where they want to understand the risks, understand, is this safe? You mentioned the word trust earlier, and trust is absolutely critical for all sorts of industries to adopt new technologies. But they will adopt it because, you know, all of the benefits that we've been talking about are things that they've been trying to solve with people and trying to solve with less autonomous technologies. They've been trying to improve the functional coverage, trying to keep pace with the rate of development, trying to get applications and APIs that are safe to deploy, that work robustly for their end users. So the problems they're trying to solve aren't new. The ways they're being solved are new. They're being solved quicker, better, cheaper. And there's been this traditional trade-off, right? You can have things that are good, fast, or cheap. And that is actually being challenged with agents and MCP because people can actually get better results quicker and at lower cost than adding more people, adding more tools. So it's a pretty significant change.
That is true. Any business would love the high velocity at good quality and lower cost. Almost sounds impossible.
It does. And I think that's why right now, again, returning to our analogy of the autonomy ladder, I think what MCP has done is got us to this kind of level 3, where people can give permission to agentic workflows to go and accelerate, but they want to check. They want to say, okay, that's fine. You can go ahead. As trust grows, we'll see people remove the reins and actually allow the agents to commit more of their work. And so that we'll see things drift up the autonomy ladder.
So as a leader of SmartBear, how do you see advantage that you see for us as SmartBear?
I think, well, if you know this, and anyone who works at SmartBear knows that I'm pushing pretty hard to get us to deploy agentic workflows ourselves. I think there's a big business benefit for us as a company to go quicker and better. That's the thing. It's not a trade-off of one versus the other, which it's traditionally been. So yeah, I think I push as hard as anyone in the company to get the staff to adopt those capabilities too. So let's zoom out from all of this for a second and think about the future. How will these agentic and more autonomous workflows change how software is developed? How will they change what teams who build applications look like in the future?
The level of abstraction this is introducing. So if you start using coding agents, a product manager possibly could write this code now, because if you give the intent and the context and here is what I want to do, a coding agent can actually create something. So now your roles are getting intermixed. The level of abstraction for what is getting written is, the distance is growing. But that doesn't mean you still do not want that quality. But what does quality mean? Is it just code-based quality with something doesn't have bugs? That's still true. You have to run something, it shouldn't crash. But now you might also have to test for, as you change things or as you produce code, is what is getting deployed what you wanted? Is it still your intent? And when you test for it, do you really care about the code level changes, or do you care about that there was no drift from what you wanted the outcome to be? And I think this is where the interesting things will start to happen. The world before was very related to line coverage, functional coverage, or what did you write for each line of code? And I think now we are abstracting more and more away from it.
I agree with that. It's a sort of connection between the abstraction of what we're asking the tools to do. We're asking them higher level questions. And so now it's introduced this new step that we need to carry out, which is when the application is built, how do we know that what has been built is everything we wanted and nothing we didn't want? And because sometimes drift is okay. Sometimes, AI depends on this creativity. Sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not. And I don't think that's an answered question yet.
No, because what variance do you find acceptable? Maybe that will be one of the definitions. Or what level of requirements or specifications do you feed enough context so that the outcome is covering what you wanted to produce? And then maybe the testing becomes the variance between what you fed, the context and specification, versus what the outcome is. Of course, along with testing that it works in all the environments and there are no bugs. So the things change drastically. And so the teams of the future, what do you think that will do to the teams?
I mean, you mentioned earlier this kind of intermixing or collapsing of roles. And I do wonder if we're going to find ourselves more and more dependent on people who just understand software and understand applications more broadly. There's no reason that a developer who has a good customer intuition can't move leftwards in the process and start essentially doing many of the tasks of a product manager. And you gave the example of product managers creating at least prototypes and maybe one day working applications. When that happens, what's the difference?
That is true.
So I think this creation of a set of really smart generalists who know how to orchestrate agents is going to be a pretty key component of those future teams.
Future teams. The design, for example, we used to say the experience for developers or software automation developers. Now it could be the agent experience. It could
Yes.
be, will the agents find this?
Yes.
Is the context given in the good way that your tool gets picked up? So it's very different looking future, but there is still one thing I do think, it's still the mixture of humans and agents together, because it may be abstracted. The job may be controlling different agents and not writing every line of code, but there is still humans involved to make sure when you see that audit trail, when you see the drift, it's the humans who have to accept that variance or not.
Yeah, there is no future where the entire SDLC is a black box. That's just not going to happen.
It's the combination.
All right, Vineeta, thanks for joining us today. Really excited to see where this goes.
Thank you, Dan. That was a great conversation.